When you hear the words dark and gritty, what games come to mind? Do you think of Elden Ring, Darkest Dungeon, Papa's Pizzeria? Well, I think of the 2023 indie horror game Buckshot Roulette. Made by Klubnika, the premise of this game is simple. You sign away your soul, and in exchange you get to play Russian roulette with a shotgun. But underneath this absurd situation is unanswered lore, interesting items, the dealer, and a whole ARG. That's why I want to make Buckshot Roulette into a D&D subclass. Not only is the gameplay loop engaging, but the lore surrounding Mike Klubnika's universe is inspiring. But before I attempt to compartmentalize this 500 megabyte game into D&D, what subclass should it be? Now when I scanned through all 13 classes, there were only a couple that caught my eye. At first I thought the Barbarian or the Rogue. Barbarian since you gotta be tanky to absorb so many shotgun shells, or maybe the Rogue since sneak attack with a shotgun sounds super cool. But then I thought of Artificer since there's so many different items in the game. But inevitably they all fell short in comparison to a class that was clearly made for this, the Warlock. As we all know, Warlocks are all about making deals for some sort of benefit, and I felt it was the best choice since you literally physically sign your soul to play the game. So with such a cut and dry answer, the next natural question is, when do Warlocks get their features? Well, according to the player's handbook, they get a spell list, a 3rd level feature, a 6th level feature, a 10th level feature, and a 14th level feature. But before we delve into all that, let's look at the title, small summary, and the description. Buckshot Patron. Relinquish your life with shotgun shells. Your pack draws on the power of the dealer, a mysterious creature wielding both a cigarette and a shotgun. Or you might make a deal with beings that believe in chance, risk, or fate. But no matter the deal you make, one fact remains the same. You've resigned your soul to play Buckshot Roulette. Now that we've clarified the possible thematics for your character, let's check out the spells. Like any spell list, I've chosen 10 spells, 2 from levels 1 through 5 that I thought the dealer would have. For first level, I chose Bane to cast bad luck on your enemies and false life, since that's how I feel when I smoke a cigarette in game. For second level, I chose Augury so you could feel the vibe of the next shell, and Hold Person since you can't leave the game once it started. For third level, I chose Fear, which feels obvious when you're staring down the end of a shotgun, and Non-Detection since you don't actually know what the dealer is. For 4th level, I chose Hallucinatory Terrain to magically generate the wacky room the dealer's in Liamon's secret chest, shout out Liamon, to mimic the effects of the briefcase. And finally, for 5th level, I chose Anti-Life Shell, since you're never close to the dealer, but you can fire projectiles at it. And Greater Restoration to heal you, since you're literally getting shot with a shotgun all the time. Now that we got the spells of the dealer, let's make the 3rd level feature of the dealer. But there's a problem. In general, there's a lot going on with Buckshot Roulette. From the charges, to the items, to the defibrillator, to the randomness of the shells, and to the choice between attacking yourself or attacking the dealer. So in order to translate that, we'll be making 2 3rd level features. The first feature will recreate the Buckshot Roulette gameplay. This will answer questions like, how do the shells work? How do we make the shells random? How do we attack ourselves? How does attacking generally work? Etc, etc, etc. The second feature will recreate the briefcase, answering questions like, how many items can you summon? When can I use them? How many can I use? And what are the different effects? But before we get into that, let's look at our 3rd level feature, General Release of Liability. You've signed your soul to play Buckshot Roulette. Here are the rules. As a bonus action, you sign the General Release of Liability. You could sign the General Release of Liability a number of times equal to your Charisma modifier. You regain 1 expended use when you finish a short rest, and you regain all expended uses when you finish a long rest. You gain the following benefits to your Eldritch Blast for 1 minute. That's right, to replicate Buckshot Roulette, I'll be using Eldritch Blast as the foundation for the shotgun. In addition, all of the benefits of this feature will only be applied after you sign the General Release of Liability, just like in the game. As for the Eldritch Blast benefits, there are 4 different parts. The first of which is, please sign the waiver. At the start of your turn or when you sign the General Release of Liability, roll 2d4. 1d4 is allocated for live shells, 1d4 is allocated for blank shells. You cannot roll for more shells until you start the turn with 0 shells. This is to set up the buckshot shells and whether or not they're live or blank. The second part is, I insert these shells in an unknown order. When rolling to hit with Eldritch Blast, you no longer have to roll a d20. Instead, you roll a die equal to the total amount of shells you have. If the shell is blank, the attack automatically hisses. If the shell is live, the attack automatically hits. If you know the upcoming shell is live or blank, you no longer need to roll. I've essentially changed the attack roll from a d20 to a 1d1 through a 1d8, as you'll see in a quick second. In the meantime, you might be thinking, Kieran, does this change how often you hit or miss? Well, yes and no. Generally, the chances to hit are incredibly variable when you take into account armor class, proficiency, challenge rating, advantage or disadvantage, half cover, full cover, etc, etc, etc. In this case, depending on the 2d4, it will usually be a 50-50 split to hit or miss, which seems pretty fair. But you can increase their chances with the third part, are you ready? If you attack yourself with an Eldritch Blast beam and the shell is blank, you gain an Eldritch Blast beam, and the next Eldritch Blast beam you cast that is not targeted at yourself deals an extra 1d4 force damage. If you attack yourself multiple times, the extra damage can stack to a maximum of 4d4. This whole part is to psychologically incentivize yourself to attack yourself in D&D, since you get an extra 1d4 extra damage and you get an extra Eldritch Blast Beam. The reason why you can attack again is because of the words Eldritch Blast Beam. And there's a reason why I said Eldritch Blast Beam, singling out one beam attack and not Eldritch Blast as a whole, because I want the rate of shots to scale with the Eldritch Blast cantrip. That way at higher levels you can attack multiple times, instead of only choosing between attacking an enemy or attacking yourself. But there is a slight problem. I'm not a huge fan of how much damage you take if you get an incorrect call. So to soften the blow of attacking yourself, I'm going to introduce the fourth and final part. Let's make this a little more interesting. If you target yourself with an Eldritch Blast Beam and the shell is live, you deal damage to yourself equal to half the amount of damage you would have taken. That way, even if you do attack yourself, the drawbacks are minimal. And just like that, we got the foundations to play Buckshot Roulette and Dungeons & Dragons. However, I understand that this whole thing does sound like a hunter ability. So let's go through a quick demo. This is me and this is you, with you being the Warlock and me being the test dummy. On your turn, you can use a bonus action to sign the general release of liability and roll 1d4 for lives and 1d4 for blanks. Let's just say you end up rolling 3 lives and 3 blanks. You see me and you want to fire at me, and since your Eldritch Blast is fundamentally altered, you'll be rolling a 1d6 since that's the total of the lives and the blanks that you have. To know if you rolled a live or a blank, I suggest making the high numbers lives and the low numbers blanks. So for example, since we rolled a 6, 1 through 3 are blanks and then 4 through 6 are lives. Now let's just say you rolled a 3 and you missed. Then on your next turn, since you used a shell, you would be rolling a 1d5. Now there are a variety of ways to roll this, and I'll show on screen a couple of different ways that you can, but for this example we'll be doing 1d6 minus 1 with 0s being rerolls. Since we lost 1 blank from the previous round, 1 to 2 is blank and then 3 through 5 are live. Now let's just say you rolled a 5 and the attack automatically hits me. Now you're down to 1d4 for the next round. Now let's just say you're sitting there and you think for some reason this one's going to be blank, so you choose to attack yourself. You roll a 1d4 with 1 through 2 being blanks and then 3 through 4 being lives. And let's just say that you roll a 2, meaning that it's blank. So you would get an extra Eldritch Blast Beam, and the next creature that you attack that isn't yourself gets an extra 1d4 force damage. This means that you can fire another Eldritch Blast Beam on the same turn, or I mean this turn, since you gained 1 back. Now it's 1 blank and 2 live, so we'll be rolling a 1d3, or 1d4 minus 1 with 0s being rerolls. And for this example, let's just say you want to attack yourself again. You roll a 2, so it's live. In this case, then you would take half the damage of the 1d10. Makes sense? I know this can be a lot, but I'm confident that if you read the full document, it would make a lot more sense. And if you have any questions at all about anything, feel free to let me know in the comments below. Speaking of commenting, please like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel a lot, and I do want to do this for a living. After the Deep Wrangler video that we did very good, which I highly recommend you look at, pretty close to getting monetized, so woo! With that being said, all my homebrew will be on Patreon, including this one, so make sure to check it out in the description below. Now that we got the game plan down, let's move on to the second part of the puzzle, the briefcase. You've been bestowed a mysterious briefcase. When you sign the general release of liability, you gain the following benefits. For using the briefcase, at the start of your turn, you may roll twice on the briefcase table to determine the items you get. For using items, all briefcase items may be used as a free action, and you can hold a maximum of 8 items at a time. All briefcase items disappear at the end of the general release of liability. For saving throws, if an item requires a saving throw, the DC equals 8 plus your charisma modifier and proficiency bonus. Now before we go through the 5 different items, you might be thinking to yourself, free action? Isn't that too strong? Well, I disagree. The reason why I chose these items to be a free action rather than a bonus action is because 1, that's how the items are used in the game, and 2, the items are generally weak. Their main purpose is much more for helping you get a live shell than anything else. Now for the 5 items. First, if you roll a 1 or 2 on the briefcase table, you get a beer. When you use the beer, roll a 1d4. If you roll a 1 or a 2, decrease the amount of blank shells you have by 1. If you roll a 3 or a 4, decrease the amount of life shells you have by 1. Second, if you roll a 3 or a 4 on the briefcase table, you get a cigarette. When you use it, you gain temporary hit points equal to your charisma modifier. Third, if you roll 5 or 6 on the briefcase table, you get handcuffs. Choose a creature within 30 feet of you. That creature must make a dexterity saving throw or have their speed halved until the start of your next turn. Fourth, if you roll a 7 or 8, you get a handsaw. Before you attack a creature with a ranged attack, you may choose to use this item. If you hit a creature with a ranged attack, add 1 extra damage die equal to the original damage die. So for example, if you did this with, let's just say, a short bow, it'd be an extra 1d6 since that's the original damage die. And last but not least, for our 5th item, if you roll a 9 or a 10, you get a magnifying glass. When you use it, roll a 1d4. If you roll a 1 or 2, the next shell is blank. If you roll a 3 or a 4, the next shell is live. Now that we finished up with the foundations, let's move on to the 6th level. For this feature, I really wanted to recreate the double or nothing round. You can get here by clicking on the Weird Alive computer, and it allows you to play Buckshot Roulette where your score can, crazy enough, double or nothing. The main thing I want to recreate is the new items that appear when you play this game mode, such as Adrenaline, Burn-a-Phone, Expired Medicine, and Inverter. But before we get into all those, let's check how it activates. Double or nothing. Whenever you roll on the briefcase table, you can also roll on the double or nothing table. If you roll a 1, you get Adrenaline. Your speed increases by 15 feet until the start of your next turn. If you roll a 2, you get a Burn-a-Phone. When you use the Burn-a-Phone, roll a 1d4. If you roll a 1 or a 2, the second shell is blank. If you roll a 3 or a 4, the second shell is live. The next time you roll an Eldritch Blast Beam, remove the shell from the roll and roll a die equal to the total amount of shells you have -1. The reason why you remove the shell from the roll is because we want to roll the correct odds. Since we know the shell is live or blank, we simply remove that shell from the lineup when it comes to firing the beam. If you roll a 3, you get Expired Medicine. When you use the Expired Medicine, roll a 1d4. If you roll a 1 or a 2, you take damage equal to your Charisma modifier. If you roll a 3 or a 4, you gain temporary hit points equal to twice your Charisma modifier. And last but not least, if you roll a 4, you get the Inverter. If you know the next shell type, live or blank, you can swap it to the opposite type. If you don't know the next shell type, when you roll to hit with your Eldritch Blast Beam, you may choose to re-roll your Eldritch Blast Beam, and you must use the new roll. And that's wraps for our items. Now that that's done and dusted, let's move on to level 3. Like level 6, the concept is similar. Similar in the sense that I improved the previous features, and in this case, the feature we're improving is Eldritch Blast. I've already changed the attack roll from a 1d20 to a 1d1 through 1d8, but that's not enough. And the fact that Eldritch Blast, which is a 120 feet beam of energy, is very unlike the short big blast of a shotgun, irks me. So I changed it by creating Eldritch Buckshot. When you sign the general release of liability, you may modify your Eldritch Blast range from 120 feet into a 15-foot cone. If you do so when you roll to hit with an Eldritch Blast Beam, you may target all creatures within the cone. This allows for an interesting AoE option and fills the realistic traits of a shotgun. However, there is a second part I haven't mentioned. If you fire a blink at a creature other than yourself, you can deal damage to that creature equal to half as much as you would have done on a successful hit. That way, even if you miss, you still are dealing at least a little bit of damage. And now that our Eldritch Blast is an Eldritch Shotgun, you might be thinking to yourself, what else? What else could Kieran add for the 14th level feature? Well, there is one last item that we haven't really talked about, the Defibrillator. You're not done yet. When you're dropped to 0 hit points, you may return back to 1 hit point a number of times equal to your Charisma modifier. You regain all these expended uses after a long rest. I added this feature because I think it ties the rest of the subclass together, reduces the risk of attacking yourself, and is a good place in regards to its mechanical strength. After all, the ability to get up after getting knocked to 0 is pretty strong, so having it here at 14th level is pretty good. And while it does compare to the Barbarian's Relentless Rage at level 11, the benefit of Relentless Rage is that you can get hit points equal to twice your Barbarian level, meaning that you're going to go last longer in a fight before Relentless Rage procs again. And with the DC and a high con, which all Barbarians should have, you'd be using Relentless Rage, I'd say, like 3 or 4 times, and all that resets on a short rest. I think that makes it clear that the Defibrillator is weaker since there's no quick healing and it resets on a long rest. And even though it is weaker, I think it hits that nice balance spot where it's weaker than pure class features, but strong enough to be useful in a pinch. Overall, I'm pretty proud of how this subclass came out. It's definitely one of my more complex subclasses by like a whole mile, but I'm still very proud of it. I do know there's issues in both interpretation and wording. I mean, I'm crunching a whole game into a D&D subclass, so of course there'd probably be some issues with it. And another problem is that Eldritch Blast isn't impacted by advantage or disadvantage anymore, and that it just bypasses armor class completely, which is a cool concept, but it still needs to be play tested. I also think that Eldritch Buckshot could deal a lot of damage, which is just something else that I need to play test. The whole thing needs to be play tested, you know? But still, I'm proud of it, and if you're interested in more of the Buckshot Roulette D&D subclass stuff, let me know in the comments which subclass you'd like me to make next. And if you haven't played Buckshot Roulette, play it. It's a really good game. I highly recommend it. It's only $2.99, or at least it's very cheap. I'll leave a link to the game in the description below. But with that being said, thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.